Welcome, warriors. This week's episode is part one of two. In this first part, we're going to hear an unbelievable story of an international kidnapping and rescue. Grab a tissue and listen in as my guest recounts her story of being kidnapped as a young child and the heroic efforts employed to bring her home. Let's rock.
Does your past haunt you? Maybe you're in a storm that feels like it will never end. Are you fighting a battle that's rendering you hopeless? Maybe you feel like you're fighting alone, but your battle was not meant to be a solo endeavor. You were meant to be a warrior among warriors. My name is Heather, and I grew up thinking my battles were nobody's business until I found myself in an abusive marriage and felt cut off from all avenues of help. In this podcast, you will hear warriors' words. They will tell you of their battles, both won and lost, their journeys, and their lessons learned along the way. But we don't stop there. These warriors will share how they have applied those lessons to go from warrior to survivor to thriver. Whether it's an abusive marriage, illness, mental health crisis, or any number of traumas this world dishes out, these warriors will use their words to help you find the beauty in your broken, move beyond your battles, and become the thriver God created you to be. Pick up your sword or boxing gloves and join the battle. Your words are powerful, my friends. Make them warrior words.
Welcome back to the Warrior Words podcast. Lauren's story is truly incredible. But first, let me share a little bit more about her. Lauren Burns is the host of the Redeemed podcast. She was kidnapped at the age of 7 by her biological father and taken to Jordan. In 1992, NBC produced a made-for-television movie about Lauren's kidnapping and rescue. Lauren's journey of forgiveness and healing is an empowering one. Her goal is to share that story to encourage others to forgive and live a redeemed life. Lauren is a full-time physical therapist, wife, and mother of 2 boys. Now, before we listen to Lauren's story, here is a review from Jen H88. Thank you. Your message is just what I needed to hear. And thank you, Jen H. I am grateful to know that you appreciate this podcast. Would you like me to read your review on an upcoming episode? Please go to Apple Podcasts and leave a review for the show. Your comments and your star ratings help people find the Warrior Words podcast, and it only takes a few minutes of your time. Thank you. And I'm going to continue to let you know about the Warrior Words Facebook community that I recently opened. Come in and join us for inspirational stories, lessons learned, and beauty bombs. What's a beauty bomb? Well, you'll have to join the group to find out. Go to facebook.com/groups/warrior words and request to join. Please answer the few questions that pop up after requesting. And I look forward to getting to know you there. Now, on to the show. Hi, everyone. As you heard in the intro, we are blessed to have Lauren Burns with us today. She is the host of the Redeemed podcast. And Lauren, I welcome you to the Warrior Words podcast.
Thank you so much, Heather, for having me. It's quite an honor to be able to be here and share with your listeners today.
Oh, well, I think we are definitely the blessed ones here because I've heard your story and it is amazing. Everybody is in for a treat. So let's just go ahead and I'm going to remind everybody this is part one of a 2-part series. And today we're going to start with Lauren's childhood and the just incredibly blessed story that didn't start out so well. So, Lauren, if you could take it away and let us know about how your childhood got started.
Yes, and I love that introduction because you're right. It didn't start out that great. Thank you for having me. My name is Lauren Burns, and I am a mom of 2 boys, and I'm married, and my full-time job is a physical therapist. But if you know when God calls you to do something and keeps sort of nudging you and stirring
Mhm.
you, and you pray about it and that those thoughts don't go away, I'm like, all right, God,
Right.
I'm going to be obedient. And so about 9 months ago, I really felt like God was calling me to start sharing my story, writing my story, actually. And I have no clue how to write a book, but I'm in that process. And then along with that came a podcast. So that's how all this stuff started. But I'm so glad that I took that leap of faith. And, when you say yes to God, He provides. He
Yes, it
gives you the
does.
time, He gives you the
Hmm.
resources, He paves the path when we are clueless. Heather, like you said, my childhood began. My parents met in Dallas, Texas. My mom was from Florida. She knew God at a young age. She was a Christian and moved to Dallas. She wanted to do something new on her own around the age of 19. And my father is from Jordan, a small town by the name of Jerash, Jordan. Jordan is near Israel, if you don't know where that is. And he was raised Muslim. And my parents met working, putting themselves through college. And when you're 19, you're not really thinking about, does this guy have the same beliefs as me? And at the
Hmm.
time,
Yeah.
my father wasn't really practicing his beliefs. And my mom was like, oh, he's handsome and he's into me and, all the feelings. So they were dating, they fell in love, and they got married. And they didn't really have much family. The I don't know how many of your listeners know what this is like, but sometimes your friends are closer to your family. Many
Hmm.
times we live in places where all we have is our friends, and that
Right.
was my mom. Um, my mom's best friends are Beverly and Rick Lambert. And if you recognize that last name, Miranda Lambert is the famous country singer songwriter.
Hmm.
Um, but before she was even born, my mom was really good friends with Bev and Rick. And Rick was a Dallas police officer. And he quit the police department about, I think he said after 16 years of working, and opened private investigation company with his wife. And they called it Lambert and Lambert. So my parents were married for 4 years, and my mom became pregnant, and my dad was so excited. He
Yeah.
couldn't wait to be a father. He was so happy. He told my mom that he needed to go to Jordan because his dad was sick and he needed to go home and be with his dad. And so my mom didn't think anything about it. She was like, sure, no problem.
Right.
So he left. But weeks turned into months, and months turned into 3 months that he was
Wow.
gone. So during this time, there wasn't a lot of communication between the two of them. My mom was working, and she actually worked for Miranda's grandmother. Her grandmother's name is Wanda. And one day when my mom was working, she told Wanda, I cannot stop going to the bathroom. Like, I can't stop peeing on myself. And Wanda was like, Kathy, that's not pee. Your water just broke.
Oh,
And
wow.
so, because I came 4 weeks early because of all the stress, emotional stress my mom was under.
Hmm.
So,
Yeah.
Wanda called her son. Her son was a volunteer firefighter. And so they drove my mom to the hospital, and they were there the day I was born. My dad came back, and you can only imagine the fear that my mom was going through, having a child on her own for the first time mom, all those emotions and all those hormones. And my dad comes back and he looks different. He's dressed in the traditional Arabic clothing. He is praying. He's getting his prayer rug out. Didn't matter where he was. And he was praying. He was going to the mosque. And my mom was like, what happened? I didn't know if you were even going to come back. I thought you had abandoned me. And he said, well, I went to Jordan to make a home for us. And
Oh.
my mom was like, what are you talking about? We never talked about moving. And he said, well, I found a job and I found a home. I have everything taken care of. He wanted my name to be Arabic. He had all these plans in his head, but never
Hmm.
told her. So by the time I was 6 weeks old, my mom was in the process of filing for divorce. Things changed quickly in her life, but God always provides.
Yes, it does.
Wanda had a friend by the name of Joyce, and she became like an Aunt Joyce. I called her
Yeah.
Aunt Joyce. She was another mom in my life. Um, for the parents listening, we need a village of people to help raise our kids, right? Well, God was bringing that village alongside into my life. So Joyce told my mom, "How about you and Lauren? Y'all move in with me. I'll help pay the rent and help you take care of Lauren." And my mom was like, "Yes, thank you." Because she's like, "How am I even going to figure out how to feed my baby?"
Right. What a
So
blessing.
that's how life began, right?
Yeah.
And I was the typical, divorced kid. I was going between my dad's house every other weekend. My mom had full custody of me, and I I loved going to my dad's house. I call it like the Disney dad. He would take me to the movies. I'd go hang out with him at his restaurant. We had a fantastic relationship. He was very loving, very kind. He eventually remarried to a woman that was also her family's from the Middle East, but she was raised in the United States, and they had children of their own.
Hmm.
So I loved going to their house. I was a big sister. I had a little brother and a little sister, and things were good. Anytime my dad wanted to see me, my mom said sure. If my mom needed extra help, he would help. And so everything was good until I turned 7 years old. My birthday's in September. October that year, Halloween weekend, my dad asked my mom if I could stay with him one extra night so I could go trick or treating. And I was so excited. I was like, yes, I want to go trick or treating with my siblings. I had a cheerleading outfit. I always wanted to be a cheerleader. I'm not athletic at all. That was my chance. So I had, it was a blue and yellow cheerleading outfit. My mom put my hair in pigtails. I had bright red lipstick, and I get my little pink suitcase. It was the ones that said going to grandma's on the front. And I had it packed, and my dad came to get me. And I get in his car, and it's just the two of us. And so I'm like, "Hey, where's my stepmom? Where's my siblings?" And he was like, "Well, I have a big surprise for you." And I was like, "Yeah, we're going trick or treating." And he was like, "Well, no, we're going to the airport." And I'm like, "What do you mean the airport? My mom said we were going trick or treating. I have
Hmm.
my outfit." And he was like, "Well, Lauren, didn't you always want to go to Jordan and meet your family that you've never met? They're so excited to meet you. I'm going to take you on a big airplane." And I was like, "Well, mom never told me about this. She didn't say that I was doing this. Does she know? Is it okay?" Well, I began to ask all the questions. And I've always been a people pleaser, even when I was little.
Right.
Um, the more questions I asked, the more my dad became angry and annoyed.
Mhm.
And all kids know when to be quiet. So eventually I stopped asking the questions because he just got more and more and more upset. So while we're headed to the airport, and that day, that Monday, if you're a single parent, you know how hard it is to leave in the middle of your workday to go have lunch with your child. It's hard enough as if you've got two parents, but it just doesn't really happen.
Hmm.
But God, it's like God knew that that things that were about to happen in our life. That Monday, my mom decided to go to have lunch with me and surprise me at school. She went to the elementary school, and she's standing in the courtyard as all the kids are lining up, getting ready to go to the cafeteria. And she's looking and scanning for me, and she doesn't see me anywhere.
Hmm.
And the teacher comes out, and she walks over to my mom, and my mom's like, "Where's Lauren?" And the teacher told her, "Lauren never came to school today." Well, the first immediate thing is she's like, "Well, I told Ollie to make sure she's at school. What do you mean?" So the first thing is
Hmm.
is frustration and anger.
Right.
And so the teacher's like, her dad never brought her to school. So instead of getting back in the car and going back home, because there's no cell phones in 1987, she went to a payphone, and she picks up that payphone, and the first person she calls is his house, and it rings and rings
Hmm.
and rings, and no one answered. So then she calls his restaurant, and when they answer, they said, "Ollie never came to work today." Well,
Mm.
then things changed, and you can call it a red flag or intuition, but I call it the Holy Spirit. At that payphone, that third phone call, my mom had gone to Jordan 9 years before they had gotten married, to meet his family. And she remembered that the main airlines into Jordan is called the Royal Alia Airlines. I think it's changed its name now, but the headquarters is in New York City. She called from that payphone. She called the headquarters in New York City, and she said, "Do you have a Lauren and Ollie arriving in Jordan today?" And of course, the woman said, "Ma'am, I can't give out that kind of information."
Right.
And then she changed her voice. Then she was like, "Please, I think my ex-husband has taken my daughter. Will you please help me?" So the woman said, "Hold on one moment." And she came back online and she said, "Yes, I have a Lauren and Ollie arriving in Amman, Jordan this evening."
Wow. I'm
That
glad
was the moment. Yeah,
yeah, that
that
she
was the
was able to
moment
do
that she
that. Yeah.
knew.
Yeah.
So the fourth phone call, she did a 911 page to Rick Lambert. And Rick and Beverly happened to be working together in the Dallas County Courthouse that day, which hardly ever happened. And Rick gets the page and he goes and gets the phone and he told Beverly, he's like, "Something's wrong. Kathy's calling me 911." So he calls her back at that payphone. And my mom begins to tell Rick, "Ollie's taken Lauren. I don't know what to do." And Rick said, we're going to meet you at the townhouse. So they get in their car and they're driving like 90, 100 miles an hour to the townhouse. My mom goes, and that's where everything begins to unfold. My mom starts trying to get a hold of my stepmother. What had happened, my stepmother was pregnant with her third child at this time.
Okay.
My dad had sent my stepmom and his children away to go visit her family outside of Texas a week before all of this happened because he was planning all of this and he didn't want her to know what he was doing.
Hmm.
And then she begins calling. And Heather, when I started writing this book, I remembered my mom had given me a box, like a moving box. And on the outside was labeled Jordan with all the newspaper clippings, the articles, the journals, the pictures, everything about my kidnapping. And she had given it to me when I was like 25, I think, when I was moving out of the house. And I just took that box and I put it in the garage. Not a good place to put your things, but that's what I did because, if you've gone through trauma, you want to put it all in a box and you want to put it
Yes.
away and you don't want to open it.
No.
And that's why it was in a box, because people ask me, why now? Because God knew I was ready now to share my story and to dig through that box because it's not easy to look at the past.
No.
So so my mom was calling and calling and calling. And before she started making these phone calls, Rick said, "Kathy, you need to go to Radio Shack and you need to get a recording device and put on the phone. So every time you make a phone call, we can go back and listen to try to get hints of where Lauren might be. Or if we call the police or if we call the State Department and they tell us, what to do, we can go back and listen because her emotions were all over the place. You can't remember everything coming in."
Right. Exactly.
Well, in the box at the bottom is a Ziploc bag full of cassette tapes.
Wow.
I pulled that out because, again, I told you, I'm like, God, how am I supposed to share this story? How am I supposed to know? I was 7. How can I remember it all, right? I ordered a cassette tape player 9 months ago from Amazon because I don't have a cassette tape player.
No, I
My
don't think
kids
many of
never-
us do.
No, my kids were like, "What is that thing?" And it had to be pink, by the way. I had to buy a pink one. And then I was like, "Please, Jesus, let these cassette tapes work," because they've been in a garage. So thank God every single one worked. I've listened to those tapes of my mom, and it is really, really hard to listen to. It's very emotional.
Yeah.
I've listened to my mom begging for anyone to talk to her, and everyone's speaking Arabic, and she's saying, "Please, someone that speaks English, please, can I talk to Ollie? Can I talk to Lauren? Please, why did he do this? I won't be mad at him. Just bring her home." And all they're saying is, "Ollie's not here. Lauren's not here. No English, no English." Call after call after call. And then Rick is contacting all his friends and contacts in the police department. And they're like, "There's nothing we can do. This is out of the United States, out of our jurisdiction." And he's trying to call the State Department. Every phone call is, I'm sorry, I can't help you. I'm sorry, I can't help you. We hear these stories. Many times the kids never come back, over and over and over again. So my mom's not eating. She's not sleeping. You can imagine the emotions she's going through.
Yeah.
And Rick and Beverly had actually, they stopped working during this time. They moved into my mom's townhouse with Miranda, and they were with her day and night. But one day Beverly was out and she called my mom. And to me, I think that's even a God thing, because I have this phone call on a cassette tape, and I've actually been able to listen to it, and I share it in my podcast. But Beverly calls my mom and she says, Kathy, you have got to get away from the emotion and the stress, and you've got to get away from all the chaos, and you've got to go be with God. And my mom just breaks down and she's crying. She's like, yes, you're right. You're right. And she's like, Beverly, will you pray over Lauren? Pray that she's safe. Pray that God protects her wherever she is. And so Beverly begins to pray on the phone over me and praying that God give my mom guidance. And then Beverly said, I read a book, and in that book, it talks about how fasting brings you the closest to God. And my mom just said, yes, I need to go. I need to fast. I need to pray. And Beverly said, you need to get away and just spend time with Jesus. And my mom said, and these cigarettes, because my mom had smoked for a long time, but at this point, she was like smoking 2 cigarettes at a time all day long, just so stressed out, you know?
Yeah.
And for the person listening, like, it's not that cigarettes are the devil, you know, I'm not saying that. But for my mom, her idol, the thing she was running to was her cigarettes, you know?
Right. Right.
And so my mom said, yes, Beverly, you're right. I need to get away. And Beverly said, don't worry, I will stay at the townhouse, because they had to continue to answer the phones. One, they didn't want my dad to be alerted that anything was going on.
Right.
And if I happened to call, if my dad happened to call, they wanted to be there to answer. And so she's like, I'll take care of everything here. Well, prior to my mom being able to go to do that, Rick had been able to get an appointment at the grand jury in Dallas. Through his connections, he was able to get a quick appointment, because it could take a long time to be able to, you know, make that happen. So he told her, Kathy, I have arranged for you to go to the grand jury, but this is just to try to get a warrant out for Ollie's arrest. So if he happens to try to come back into the United States, maybe to see his wife and children, then they can capture him, and maybe that way we can get to Lauren. But that's probably all that's going to happen with this meeting. So he drives her to the courthouse that day. She stands before the grand jury and she tells her story of me being taken. And after hearing the story, they say, I'm so sorry. Same thing that she's already been told.
Right. Yeah.
There's nothing we can do. We don't have a treaty between Jordan and the United States. In other words, if the United States gets involved, it's going to be messy. We can't do that. So then she just sort of drops her composure and she's like, can I be real with you right now? It's not fair. It's not fair that we spend billions of dollars in foreign aid every year, and you're telling me that you can do nothing to help me get my child back. Well, everyone sitting on that jury was shaking their head like, you're right. It's not. And then one man stood up, and his name is Al Zapanta. Al is a really big deal in the military world. He has a lot of awards, and a lot of people know his name. He's done a lot in the political world. He's in his 80s, and he's still working. And Al stood up and opened his wallet and handed my mom his business card. And he said, my name's Al Zapanta. If you're not happy with what the State Department does for you, give me a call. Well, if you know what it's like to feel so defeated, and like, you know, the devil's just got that hold on you. You can't get excited or happy, because everything has been bad for so long. So she put that card in her pocket and she didn't think much about it. Rick drove her back to the townhouse, and Beverly was like, well, how did it go? And she was like, they can't do anything for me. So my mom grabbed her Bible, grabbed her bag, and she looked at Bev and she said, I don't know where I'm going. I don't know how long I'm going to be gone. And Beverly said, don't worry, Kathy, I've got it under control here. She got in her car and she headed to Fort Worth, Texas, and she found a little motel room, checked herself in, And there she was there for 3 days and 3 nights, got on her knees, fasted and prayed, begging God, you have to help me. I'm at the end of myself. I don't know what to do. And during that time, God gave her a Bible verse, Daniel 10:12. Do not be afraid, Daniel. Since the first day you set your mind to gain understanding, to humble yourself before God, your words were heard. You see, God was saying, I see you, Kathy. I see you. You've stopped the chaos and you've come to me in this little motel room. You've humbled yourself like this is too big. I can't do this. I need you. And then God began to speak to her and said, you need to let go of your cigarettes because that's your idol that you're running to. And you need to let go of any place of bitterness and unforgiveness in your heart because we know the Bible says the prayers of the righteous, God honors those prayers. And that unforgiveness and that hard heart, it's almost like it blocks those prayers, to Jesus.
Yeah.
So my mom was like wrestling with God. I call it wrestling with God on the floor of that motel room. And she said, okay, I lay these cigarettes down. I won't smoke again if you bring Lauren back to me. And she began to just sort of confessing those areas of anger and unforgiveness. She left that motel room and she went back to the townhouse. And when she walked in, Beverly said, you don't look the same. My mom actually got her oil changed. She paid some bills. She was like a normal human being. And she had this glow about her. And she told Beverly, God's going to bring Lauren back. He told me.
Wow.
After that is when everything changed. Nothing in my story happened until my mom was on her knees with God. She remembered that card. She pulled it out and she called Al. Al begins to tell my mom, and a lot of this I couldn't tell you until I started this podcast because I've talked to these men. I've learned so much in the last 3 months. So I'm telling you guys, if God's calling you to do something and it sounds crazy, pray about it and do it.
And do it. Yes.
You never know what's going to happen. So my mom calls Al, and Al tells my mom 1 week before he was in that grand jury where my mom was, he was in Washington, D.C., having lunch with a man by the name of Everett Alvarez. Everett Alvarez is very well known in the military world. I'm pretty sure they talk about him when you go through training. He was one of the first POWs, very high up ranking. Al and Everett were having lunch, and Everett was telling Al, just casual conversation, about this group of men in North Carolina, and they had formed a company called CTU. And the men were ex-military, and their mission, what they were wanting to do was to go into the Middle East and rescue people that had been captured. You can't tell me that's not God.
No.
Why was Al in that jury room that day with my mom? So my mom quickly said, yes, put me in contact with those men. And Al's like, wait a minute, it's going to cost a lot of money. And they have not done a mission before. And if it goes south, if they get captured, we can't help you. This is not a military deal, right? This is not military sanctioned. My mom said, I don't care. I will pay for them to come to Dallas. Call them. So during these days and weeks of trying to research and figure out answers, my mom was also, with the help of Rick and Beverly, she was collecting all the photos she had from when she had gone to Jordan those years before. And I have all of these. She had binders, 3-ring binders of all of my dad's family members. I think my dad has 12 siblings.
Oh, wow.
All of their names, what they look like, what they did for their career, their mannerisms. She had drawn by memory what the house looked like. And then she had gotten maps of Jerash and of Amman and all the surrounding areas. So when she met the men that day and had that meeting, she walked in with all those binders. And she sat down. And to hear these men talk about my mom, they're like, she was so composed. I mean, she was in her young 30s at this point, right? She was so composed and, yes, emotional and so ready. She laid all of the information at our hands and was like, I need you to help me go get my daughter. Well, they spent, I think, a few hours thinking it over. I'm like, yes, we'll do it. But it's going to take a lot of money. just to pull it off, not even
Hmm.
including paying them.
Right.
And
Yeah.
we don't know, we may not be successful and this is going to be dangerous. And she said, I don't care, whatever it takes. So once they agreed, my mom's job was to go to Washington, D.C., because you sort of have to have a passport to bring someone
Yeah.
back home. So how do
Yeah.
you get a passport for a kid when the kid's not with you? So my
Yeah.
mom went to Washington, D.C. She thought she was going to be there a few days. It turned into more like a week and a half. And everything was very challenging trying to get those passports. Al was trying to help her connect her with the right people. They were having to pay some money to get the paperwork and to get the border passes and an entry stamp to the passport, all the things to do to travel. And then Dave, he's one of the men that was on the rescue team. His job was intelligence. He was the first man to go into Jordan, and his job was to try to find an escape route. And in the interview, he goes into detail of explaining the different routes that he was looking at and why some of them would not work, which blew my mind, like the intricacies of it all.
Right. Yeah.
And then his job was to try to find me and try to find the house.
Hmm.
Well, he had been there for several days. And the longer that you're what they say in country, the more at risk you are of people identifying you, especially as like, hey, you don't belong here. This is a
Right.
small town.
Yeah.
And he's in disguise and he knew every day he was there, the risk was getting higher and higher. So Dawn and JD came in to Jordan and their job was to try to find me because Dave hadn't found me yet. They had pictures of me and I have olive complexion skin, I have darker hair, but I have light blue eyes. I have my mom's eyes. And so that was sort of the distinguishing feature to try to, identify me. And so one day, JD is standing out on the streets, and all of these men are Christians. They're all believers. And at this point, JD's praying, like, God, I've used all my skills. I don't know what to do. You got to help me find her. And Don was standing a few feet away from him. And a school bus pulls up, and right where JD was standing, and he said, I don't remember this, but he said, I turned and I looked straight out through my window, locking eyes with him. And he sort of yelled at Dawn. He's like, Dawn. And he runs over to Dawn. He's like, I saw her. And Dawn's like, what is going on? He's like, I saw Lauren. He's like, what do you mean? He's like, I saw, he said, how do you know? He's like, I saw her eyes.
The
She's on that
eyes.
bus.
Yes.
And right as that bus is passing by, so they try to get in their car and follow the bus, but the roads were really packed with people and like donkey carts and all the things. And so they lost the bus, but it was the first time they actually knew I was in Jordan because they started thinking, what if I was in Lebanon? What if my
Yeah.
dad had moved me somewhere else? So they contact my mom. At this point, my mom was in Cyprus waiting with another one of the men. His name is Jim. His job was to stay with my mom and like sort of move her between countries whenever they needed her.
Hmm.
And his job was also to move the cash around because you have to have cash to pay for things. So my mom was thrilled to hear that they had found me, but they still hadn't found my dad's home. So then they said, Kathy, we're going to need you to come to Jordan and find the house. Time is ticking. We're risking being, noticed by people. So they dressed my mom in disguise, put her on a plane, and they met her at the airport in Amman. And Dawn and JD drove my mom into Jerash. As my mom is driving or riding in the car, her heart just sort of sinks in her chest and fear starts to come over her. Nothing in that town looked the same. Those
Oh, wow.
dirt roads were now paved. The
Hmm.
little buildings were now big. They sort of build on top of the buildings because there's not a lot of space.
Okay.
Nothing looked familiar. My mom got down in the floorboard and sort of buried her head down in her hands, and she began to pray out loud, crying out loud. And Don was driving, and he had to just do whatever my mom said because they didn't know what else to do. This was like a last hope thing, right?
Right.
My mom said it's like the Holy Spirit was just showing her where she had walked so many years before. And she began to remember the road and the turning and the up and down in the hills. And she began to just say, go straight, turn left, turn right. And all of a sudden, she looked out her window and she saw my dad's car sitting on the street
Oh
with
my,
Texas license plates.
wow.
He had shipped his car from Texas to
Wow.
Jordan. And
So
so
he
she sort
wasn't
of
planning
froze.
on coming back.
No, he
No.
wasn't planning on coming back. No. And when I listen to these cassette tapes, it's very adamant. He is very arrogant, very adamant. Well, maybe someday when Lauren's older and things are calmer, you can come visit. So my mom finally says, I saw Ollie's car on the street corner. And so Don said, Kathy, hide your face. And about that time, Don looks out his window and he sees my dad walk out of a building long enough to identify him. And that's the moment that they found the house. So again, nothing happened before my mom got down on her knees and began crying and praying, I need you to show me where Lauren is. You haven't brought us this far for no reason.
Right. Right.
So they found me, they found the house, and at this point they realized where the house was in the middle of the city near a police station, so that would be too
Mm,
dangerous to try to get me out of the house. So they
right.
started following the bus to see, is there a good place to try to get me off the bus? And I had told my mom after the fact one night when I returned home, I slept in the bed with her for a long time. You can imagine the
Mm,
trauma that I went through and the fear that I went through. But I had told her that just a few weeks before my rescue, those children had just started going to school with me. So to me, that's just another God thing. You know, just his timing is always perfect. Even when we don't know it, we can't see it when you're in
right.
the midst of, I call a storm.
Mm-hmm.
So when they were following this bus, there was a little farmhouse on the outskirts of town, and they decided that's where they were going to get me off the bus and hijack the bus while the other kids were getting on the bus. So the plan that day was one of the cars, they had two different colored cars. One of the guys was going to be in one car, and his job was to watch the house to make sure I actually got on the bus that day. Because
Okay.
can you imagine hijacking a bus and I'm not even on
Not
it,
even
you
there.
know?
Yeah. Yeah.
So that was his job. And then the other car had my mom and JD and Dave. They were all in the other car. So Dawn was watching the bus. And the code word for the mission, because Al Zapanta was in Washington, D.C., Jim was in Israel. They had all these people sort of stationed. We don't know what Al was going to be able to do if things went bad, but
Right.
the code word that everything was a go and the mission was going to happen, Al came up with, the sun is shining. Even the code word to my mom was Jesus is the sun. The sun is shining, you know?
Okay.
So it's like the whole time, God's like, Kathy, I see you. I've got you. I will never leave you. I will never forsake you. So Don sees me get on the bus and he drives to where the other car is. And he gets out, switches with Dave. Dave gets out. And he said, Lauren got on the bus. So Dawn drives my mom and JD towards the bus as the bus is parked and they block the bus in. Dawn gets out and goes to the driver's side and he's distracting the driver. JD goes to the passenger side, like the accordion style doors, and
Mm-hmm.
he's sort of
Yeah.
breaking through the door. My mom, they're all in disguise. And there's a lot of things I have forgotten about my story, but this memory is vivid. I will never forget. My mom came over to my window and I'm sitting on the bus and she taps on my window and, her hair is covered
Mm-hmm.
and she's looking at me and she's motioning to me. And I just froze in that seat. I couldn't move because all I can think of is that looks just like my mom, but how can it be? My mom's all the
Mm,
way in Dallas. I think at this point, I already figured I wasn't going to see her again. I was going to school, I was learning Arabic, and I just froze. So my mom went around to where JD was. JD had gotten the keys out of the ignition and threw them into some bushes, hoping that the driver would go look for the keys instead of going straight to the police, which is what he did. And
Very
my
good.
mom, pushed past all the other kids on the bus, and she scoops me up in her arms and grabs my backpack. And as she's getting off the bus, there's a lady chaperone. The lady chaperone jumps on my mom's back. So my mom lets go of my hand long enough to punch the lady in the nose. Now there's blood coming down this lady's face. So I
Oh,
am in
wow.
total shock, right? Like, I'm like, first of all, my mom's here. Second of all, she just punched the lady. Like, so JD and Dawn see what's going on, and they come over and they help my mom. They get me into the car and they put me down in the floorboard of the car and they cover me with blankets. And we jump in and we speed off and we meet Dave, and Dave switches cars with us.
Hmm.
So Dave took the car that was used for the hijacking, and we started driving towards the border, towards Israel, because the drive between where we were and the border was about a 45-minute drive.
Okay.
Dave had the most dangerous part. He took that car and he drove back towards the city because he was trying to be a decoy,
Hmm.
and
Okay.
it worked. Dave was pulled over on the side of the road. Tons of Jordanian police were surrounding him. They pull him out of the car. They are tearing through that car, through the trunk, looking for any identification of me or my mom. All he had was like a Snickers bar and a soda. And he's just speaking English. He's acting like a tourist, like, hey, where's the best place to go fishing around here? As they're like speaking Arabic and they're interrogating him. Then they bring the bus driver to him. And the bus driver is speaking Arabic and he's pointing to the car. He's like, that's the car. Yes, that's the car. But I don't know who that guy is because remember, Dave
He
wasn't a
wasn't
part of that
there.
hijacking. And so
Wow.
this was going on for like 30 minutes. And then all of a sudden, my mom had made reservations for us to fly home out of Jordan that day in hopes that it would be another decoy, that they would be looking for us at the airport.
Hmm. Yeah, that makes sense.
All of a sudden, on those little walkie-talkies, those radios, all you hear is Alia Airport, Alia Airport. Dave said within moments, they all left him standing on the side of the road. They jumped in their cars and they all headed to the airport looking for me. They were shutting down that whole airport trying to find me and my mom.
Wow.
While that's all going on, we're driving towards Israel. And on this day, the fog is so, so thick that all you can see is barely the front of the car. And we're switching out of our clothes, getting out of my uniform. They're getting out of the clothes that they were in. We slow down long enough. There's like refugee camps between Jordan and Israel of children and people living in these camps. And we slow down long enough to hand the clothes out to the kids.
Wow.
And we begin continuing to drive towards Israel. And all of a sudden, my mom's holding me in the back seat. I wasn't speaking at all. I was burning up with a fever. My mom's like, well, something's wrong with Lauren. She's not speaking. I was only speaking Arabic when I would speak.
Mhm.
And they said, Kathy, it's okay. She's in shock. It's normal for her to have fever. This is a lot of trauma. She's okay. So she's just, praying in the back seat. And my mom looks up and she said, what is that bright light in the distance through all the fog? And Don was like, well, Kathy, that's Israel. And from my mom, it's like the sun was shining over Israel. Again, God's like, Kathy, I see you. I'm not going to
Mhm.
leave you because that was so dangerous. We could have been pulled over at any moment, nothing to protect us but
Oh,
God.
God.
So we
Yeah.
continue to drive towards Israel. And if you've ever been in any area like that, the borders are very secure. You cannot just drive your car over the border. You have to leave your car behind. You get on a bus. The bus drives you, and then halfway, like a Jordanian or Israeli soldier and bus driver, they switch
Mhm.
and they drive you on over into Israel. And there's big flags. There's big towers with soldiers and machine guns across their chests, and the fence and the barbed wire. So Don and JD, they had gone through these checkpoints over and over and over. They knew this route like the back of their hand, but they were on high alert because what were they going to do if things went down? They realized who we were. How are they going to get us out of there?
Mhm.
And my mom had to hand over that paperwork she worked so hard to get. And that's scary. So she hands the paperwork over. We're waiting at that bus terminal. We're waiting, waiting, waiting. Finally, they let us get on the bus, and my mom's holding me, and we're sitting on that bus. It seemed like it was forever. Finally, the bus driver gets on the bus. They hand back the paperwork to my mom. The men are still on high alert, and our bus starts driving to the middle of that bridge. And about that time, right after the Israeli soldier and bus driver got on the bus, a big commotion of cars were coming up behind us where we had just left. They had just realized that we were not at the airport, but we were on that bus. But at that point, there's nothing they could do because we were already crossed over the border into Israel. When we got off, my mom, you can imagine her emotions, just like everything she was keeping in came out. She's hugging me, she's kissing me, she's crying, I'm crying. And there's women that are standing there waiting on the Israeli side, and they go over to JD, and JD is this big, handsome military guy, and they go over and they're like, "Excuse me, sir, but what's going on? Is that woman okay? Is that little girl okay? What is happening?" And JD turns and he's got tears going down his face. And he said, "You see that little girl? She's been gone for 3 months. And we just brought her back. We just rescued her out of Jordan. And this is the first time she's able to reunite with her mom." And the women begin to jump up and down and they're singing, "Praise you, Jesus. Hallelujah. We've come to the Holy Land and we have seen a miracle." And they began to pray over us. God was with us the whole time. But nothing happened in my story until my mom prayed and she put her eyes on God instead of her circumstance and her situation. And that's why I'm here today sharing. I can't keep that story to myself.
No.
It doesn't matter what you've been through, right? You don't have to have a child kidnapped. You
Right.
could go through a divorce or an illness or a sickness or a loss or a child that has gone down the wrong path and you feel overwhelmed with fear and shame. But God's like, I've got you no matter what the situation is.
I have I have had tears and chills so many times during this story, and uh, just in awe of the bravery of these men and your mother, the strength that your mother had. And then, of course, just God's hand in everything. You can see his fingerprints everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
Um, wow. I think I
Mm-hmm.
think I think this person who's supposed to be talking for a living doesn't know exactly what to say.
But Heather, you're
But
right. I mean, you say it so well. The bravery of my mom. Yes, God. But I mean, I spoke at church the other day. I'm like, faith over fear.
mhm,
What if my mom let fear guide her? And it's hard to tell this story because there's a lot of parents and a lot of people that have fought and prayed and had faith, right? And the situation didn't turn out the way that they wanted. Trying to overcome cancer and the person still lost that battle. Not everything is going to be, one of my friends said, tied up like a pretty red ribbon, like my
yeah.
story is. And I mean, I dealt with a lot of trauma after the fact, but thank God my mom didn't let fear guide her as a single
Yes.
mom thinking, "Oh, well, this is too big for me." Thank God she had Beverly in her life to point her back to Jesus. We all need that. I always share, as iron sharpens iron, so does one man sharpen another. That scripture in the Bible is
Yeah.
so true. You need your village, you need your people, the right people to point you in the right direction. Um, and even talking to the men, and when you hear them share their story in the interviews, they will say there's so many things that could have gone wrong and should have gone wrong,
Mhm.
but God,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah. Like we were chatting before I turned the the recording on, that just that story of your mom directing
Yeah.
blind,
Yeah.
because she's not looking. She's
Mhm.
she's directing through the Holy Spirit and the memories, and wow, it just to find the house, to find the car. I mean, that right there is confirmation that he was never intending to bring you back for any reason.
No, he was not.
Wow. Oh, well, everyone who is listening, as Lauren has mentioned, she has told her story a few times, not a few times, over a few episodes,
Mm.
in her podcast. And she has actually interviewed a couple of these men that she mentioned. And I've heard them all, and they are incredible. So I'm going to make sure that podcast is linked in the show notes so people can come here. And you do also, she plays some of those tapes that she mentioned from that box, and you get to hear her mom's voice and your dad's voice too. You get to hear both of them, and just such an amazing story. And I love
Mm.
that you have named your podcast Redeemed,
Thank you.
because that's what this is. It's a redemption story.
It
Um,
is. It's not about me. It's not
no,
about my mom. It's all about Jesus and what he did in my life, but not just my life, the lives of so many people. We can get caught up in looking around thinking we're the only ones because we get caught up in like social media and thinking
mhm,
people have it all together, but it's just not true. Life is hard. It's not easy. But God can teach us so much, and He wants so much good for us. And we can learn so much through the journey that we go through. And so, yes, that's why I call it redeemed. Psalms 107:2, let the redeemed of the Lord tell their story, those He redeemed from the hand of the foe.
and he did, yes. And I love that you mentioned just there that, um, so many other people, because this is your story, but it's not just about you. It involved your mother, it involved your father, it involved these brave men who didn't know any of you guys.
Mm-hmm.
It involved Rick and Bev, all of these people, and they're all witnesses to everything and participants to everything that God did. And I'll bet numerous lives were changed then. And now you have the opportunity to change more lives now. What
Mm-hmm.
what an amazing blessing. Amazing
Thank
blessing.
you. Well,
So
thank you. Thank you for letting me come on and share because I can't get my story out there without you, Heather. Serious.
well, I'm not the only one. We need to get your story out there far and wide. Um, Now you did mention, the that there were some positives. Like you were, um, that you loved your dad, and you
Oh,
loved your time with him, and you loved your stepmother, and the other children, your siblings. Um, and so I wonder, though, if you can see, was there any beauty in your time in Jordan? Because you were 7 years old.
mhm,
Um, you ended up going to school, you ended up trying to learn a new language, and maybe
mhm,
a new culture, a new way of life. Um, you had to do so without your mother. And
mhm.
so that I can't even imagine what that was like. But was there anything about your time there that you can find any beauty in that?
That's a good question, Heather. I'm a glass half full kind of person, always looking for the good and the positive.
Hmm.
My stepmother was not with me. That would have helped, to be honest. My
Yeah.
siblings were not with me. That would have helped. She would not go to Jordan, and I have all those tapes too. But I don't share those because I want to respect her. Um,
Yeah.
she refused to go to Jordan as long as he had me because she said, I'm not her mother. She has a mother. And so when I was there, things were very different. At 7, I realized something was different, but I didn't
Mhm.
know why. When we
Right.
got to Jordan, it it's like my dad, I don't want to say the word dumped me, but he left me with my grandmother I had just met, my aunts that I had just met, and they were very loving,
Mhm.
mainly spoke Arabic, some spoke English. And I guess his job was to go hang out with the men, and the women's job was to take care of me. That was very different, that cultural difference. I was used to my dad like brushing my hair for me and taking care of me and tucking me in
Mhm.
at night and loving on me. He did not do any of that. It was like a switch of a light when we got there. So I was aware oh, he's not supposed to do these things here. And I was learning Arabic, and everything was different. For a 7-year-old little girl, the bathroom situation was a little devastating for me, I'll be honest. It was a hole in the ground with a chain above, and there was no toilet paper, so you had to use your hand to clean yourself. That was traumatic for me at 7.
Yeah.
I hated
Wow.
going to the bathroom. So there was a lot of those kinds of things I was going through. And going to the mosque to pray. I thought I was praying to Jesus. I didn't know. It's like God is God.
Right.
So I
Right.
was going through all of those things. But to answer your question, the beauty, the food, when I smell the Middle Eastern food and the hummus, again, my dad was always in the like kitchen. I don't remember him cooking. I bet he did, but again, it was like my grandmother, my aunts, it was
Mhm.
their job. But there's certain foods, falafel, and being on the streets, I do remember it was so safe there, probably because they're so strict.
Yeah.
We could like run around the streets back in the 80s at least. We could be out all night, and I had a lot of family. There was a lot of children.
Mhm.
And so those are good memories. Running around the streets with my cousins and eating falafel right off the streets, at the big
Yeah.
walks with all the grease dripping off of it, and the hummus and the pita bread. Those are good memories. So yes, those are some good memories. I miss the relationship I had with my father. I lost my father at 7. I lost him when he took me because nothing was
Yeah.
ever the same.
Right. Wow. Yeah, because he totally changed your life, and he totally changed the um what's the word I'm looking for?
Hmm.
The relationship, the father-daughter relationship, by taking you against your will and then dumping you into a totally new culture.
Yeah.
Yeah, and to go from someone, because you mentioned he worked in a restaurant, so he had
Hmm.
a restaurant. So to go from that to a culture where that was the women's work and not
Hmm.
what he, so vastly different. So I'm glad that you can look back and you can see something that, that you can cherish, and that you can, you know, I guess smile fondly on. Um,
Hmm.
even though it was such a traumatic time and so different. I can't imagine being my age, 50 plus, and trying to adapt to that dramatic of a change.
Hmm.
But for a 7-year-old,
Yeah.
you have, at 7, you have less resources and less knowledge and, less capabilities, to do that. You kind of just have to. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And I would ask to talk to my mom, and he would get mad. I'd ask to talk to my stepmom. Like, if I could at least talk to my stepmom. And I thought about what she had gone through too. I never really thought
Yeah.
about that until later. Like you said earlier, a lot of people were involved. My siblings, like, there's a lot of things that one person can cause and affect all those. It's like a divorce. When you go through a divorce, it affects everybody around
Everybody.
you, not
Hmm.
just the two of you, not just your children.
Right.
So maybe that's a good comparison. But yeah, it affected a lot of lives, the decision that he made.
Yeah. Mm. Well, I think I'm gonna end it here. Normally, I like to ask a few other questions, but I think I'll save them to the end of our part two.
Sure.
And I want to thank you for blessing us with your time, for blessing us with your story, for listening and being obedient to share your story, so
Mm-hmm.
that other people can learn and grow and see the power of the Holy Spirit, and see, honestly, to see that the sun is shining.
Mm-hmm.
I
You're
I
very welcome.
I love that. I love that. So All right, everyone, I am going to say so long and not goodbye. And we will have Lauren back for part 2 next week. So see you later. Okay, y'all. Yet another episode where I was speechless at one point. I said it in the intro, and I'm going to say it again. Lauren's story is just truly incredible. All of those people, everyone involved, lives were changed. As Joseph says in Genesis 50, verse 20, you intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. Now, whether there was actual intent to harm Lauren's mother, Kathy, or just selfish reasons, there was much harm and much damage done. But as she shared, Lauren's mother, her life was the first life to be changed. She surrendered, fasted, prayed, and listened to what God had for her. And that surrender was the beginning of God being able to use her to bring about the good, life-saving, life-changing work in the lives of all who were involved in Lauren's story. Now, I love that Lauren, knowing that she is the center of this story, removes herself from being the focal point. She humbly acknowledges that this is a God-centered story, and so many others played pivotal roles in this story. She points to Jesus and his Holy Spirit as being the mastermind behind this mission of rescue and redemption. And I'm going to remind you once again, the code is the sun is shining. Where is the sun shining in your life today? Something to think about this week. Until we meet again, armor up, fight the good fight, seek beauty, and make your words warrior words. God bless.